Steve Harvey's marriage has hit rock bottom, and his emotional words will leave you speechless. After years of public success and a picture-perfect family, Steve opens up about the heartbreak that's been tearing him apart behind closed doors. His painful confession about his marriage is raw, real, and filled with emotion. This isn't just another celebrity gossip story. It's a glimpse into the soul of a man struggling with loss, regret, and the reality of his crumbling relationship. Don't miss this deeply moving moment. Steve Harvey and Marjorie's marriage was once seen as the epitome of success and love. To the public, they were the perfect couple, constantly showing up together, hand in hand, radiating happiness and strength. Whether it was walking the red carpet, laughing together in interviews, or posting intimate moments on social media, it seemed like they had everything figured out. Fans looked at them and saw a love that could weather any storm. A couple who had managed to blend their lives, their families, and their careers in a way that looked effortless. Steve often talked about Marjorie with such admiration. He called her his queen, his best friend, his ride or die. He credited her for helping him transform from a man with a checkered past into the successful, focused individual he had become. In interviews, he would share their story with pride, how meeting Marjorie had changed his life for the better. She was the one who helped him balance his hectic career and chaotic life, grounding him in ways he never thought possible. Together, they built not just a family, but a brand. Marjorie ran a popular fashion blog, while Steve continued to host shows, write books, and give relationship advice. From the outside, they seemed unstoppable. They traveled the world, lived in luxury, and shared the beautiful moments of their lives with fans who admired their bond. They made it look easy. Their love was an example to many that even in the glare of fame, two people could build a solid, unbreakable foundation. But as time went on, the image they had so carefully cultivated started to show cracks. People who were close to them began to notice a shift in their relationship. It wasn't obvious at first, but it was there. The same couple who once couldn't stop talking about how much they meant to each other suddenly began to seem more distant. The once passionate and constant exchanges between them turned into awkward silences. Steve was consumed with his work, always running from one project to the next, hosting, producing, writing, and building his brand. Meanwhile, Marjorie, who had her own career, seemed less engaged, more withdrawn. Rumors began to spread, subtle at first, then growing louder as the public began to notice they weren't always seen together anymore. The couple that once appeared inseparable now seemed like strangers in the same space. They were seen apart at events, and photos started to show them sitting distantly from each other. Their social media, once filled with joint pictures and loving messages, grew quieter. The spark that once defined their public image seemed to be fading. Fans brushed it off at first, thinking every couple goes through ups and downs. But as time went on, it became harder to ignore the signs that something was wrong. What had once seemed like an unshakable marriage, a love story admired by so many, was now slipping into something more painful, more real. Behind the smiles and the public appearances, a deeper shift was taking place. The foundation that had once seemed so solid was quietly crumbling, and neither Steve nor Marjorie was able to stop it. What looked perfect on the outside was far from it on the inside. And while the world still saw them as the picture of love and success, the reality was far more complicated. The collapse of their public perfect marriage had begun long before anyone outside their inner circle could see it. Behind the carefully crafted image of Steve Harvey and Marjorie's marriage, a subtle but undeniable shift was quietly unfolding. To the public, they were the perfect couple, constantly sharing sweet photos, exchanging compliments, and seeming to lead the kind of fairy tale life that many people longed for. But what the world didn't see was that something had changed long before the rumors started swirling. The dynamic between them had slowly but surely started to erode. It wasn't obvious at first. To the casual observer, things seemed perfectly fine. Steve and Marjorie still attended events together, posed for pictures, and posted loving messages about each other on social media. But behind closed doors, the laughter that once filled their home had started to fade. Conversations grew shorter, silences became longer, and the warmth that had once defined their relationship seemed to be slipping through their fingers. There were no huge blow-ups, no loud arguments, just a slow, quiet drift. Steve, who had always been known for his larger-than-life personality and constant drive, found himself increasingly consumed by his work. His career was booming, but at what cost? He was constantly moving from one project to the next, whether it was hosting his show, writing books, giving advice, or working on new ventures. He was everywhere, but emotionally he seemed to be slipping further away from the one person he once called his queen. His focus was on everything else: the work, the public image, the brand he had worked so hard to build. But Marjorie, once his confidant and closest ally, seemed to be left behind in the rush. Marjorie, on the other hand, had her own life, her own career, and her own passions. She was running her fashion blog, keeping up with her own projects, and enjoying the luxuries of their lifestyle. But it seemed like she was becoming more distant. What once seemed like a perfect balance between the two of them, Steve's hustle and Marjorie's grace, began to feel unbalanced. Marjorie wasn't as engaged as she had been, and while Steve kept pushing forward with his ambitions, Marjorie seemed to retreat into herself more and more. They stopped sharing those intimate moments, those small victories, and inside jokes that once made their bond so special. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, the kind of thing that sneaks up on you when you're not paying attention. Steve had always been a man of ambition, driven by a desire to succeed, to provide, and to build something bigger than himself. But somewhere along the way, in the pursuit of all those goals, he lost sight of what mattered most: his connection with Marjorie. His busy schedule, his need to keep moving forward, began to overshadow the quieter, more personal moments that had once defined their relationship. The cracks in their relationship became more apparent to those closest to them. Insiders began to notice the tension that had slowly crept into their marriage. Friends would see them at events, and instead of the warm, affectionate couple they once were, they seemed more like two people simply going through the motions. They'd sit together, but there was no spark. No shared joy. The energy between them was different. People started to notice that the moments they once shared were now few and far between, and when they were together, it was often in the public eye, where they were expected to perform, to smile, and to act like everything was still as it should be. At first, the whispers were subtle. It was just a rumor here, a gossip blog there. But slowly, those whispers grew louder. Fans who had once adored them as the ultimate power couple began to question what was really going on. Why weren't they posting as many pictures together? Why did they seem so distant in interviews? Why did they start attending events separately? The once vibrant relationship seemed to be losing its luster, and fans who had invested so much emotional energy into their fairy tale began to wonder if the fairy tale was, in fact, over. The rumors about their marriage started to take a darker turn. People began to talk about trust issues, how Marjorie had become emotionally distant, how Steve had withdrawn into himself, and how the couple was living more like business partners than a married couple. There were even whispers that they were no longer sharing a bedroom and had begun spending more time apart, even when they were in the same house. The idea of a perfect marriage started to seem more like a carefully crafted illusion, one that had been held together by the weight of appearances but was no longer sustainable. As the tension mounted, Steve and Marjorie did little to address the growing divide. Instead, they remained silent, allowing the rumors to swirl and the media to speculate. Steve, who had always been known for his charisma and larger-than-life personality, tried to keep the pain inside, but it wasn't easy. He would go on with his shows, crack jokes, and smile for the cameras, but there was something off about him. His usual energy was fading, and those close to him could see the toll that the situation was taking on him. He was pretending to be okay, but inside, he was breaking. Behind the scenes, things were falling apart. Steve reportedly spent longer hours at the studio, working late into the night, retreating further into his work. He had always used his career as a way to cope with challenges, but this time it wasn't enough. Marjorie, on the other hand, seemed to pull away, taking solo trips and spending more time doing her own thing. The distance between them grew, and with it, the silence. A silence that was louder than any fight could ever be. Steve tried to salvage the relationship. He made efforts to fix things, seeking therapy, taking time off work to focus on their marriage, but nothing seemed to work. The connection between them had been lost over time, and no amount of therapy or reconciliation could repair what had been slowly eroded. The realization that their time together might be coming to an end weighed heavily on Steve's heart. He had always prided himself on his ability to overcome challenges, to push through the hard times, but this was different. This was personal, and this time he couldn't fix it. In private, Steve was heartbroken. He replayed the moments of their marriage, wondering where things had gone wrong, asking himself if he had missed the signs, if he could have done more. He had trusted Marjorie completely, given her everything he had, and now it felt like it was slipping away. As the tension at home grew unbearable, the love that had once brought them together now felt like a painful reminder of how far they had drifted. Small things turned into big fights, and the love that had once been so strong was slowly fading into silence. The shift behind the scenes wasn't something that happened suddenly. It was the result of months, maybe even years of growing apart. The cracks that had appeared in their marriage were no longer ignorable, and despite their best efforts, the relationship that had once seemed perfect began to crumble. It wasn't the dramatic end that many might have expected. It wasn't an explosive argument or a public scandal. It was much quieter than that. It was the result of neglect, of taking each other for granted, of failing to nurture the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. And so, as Steve Harvey stood on the edge of divorce, the man who had once preached about love and relationships was left asking himself the same painful questions that anyone who has ever experienced heartbreak asks. What happened? How did we get here? How do you fix something that's already broken? For Steve, the answer was not about finding blame or holding on to what once was. It was about coming to terms with the reality that even the most carefully crafted relationships can break. And sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you just can't stop it. The public was blindsided when the whispers of betrayal surrounding Steve Harvey and Marjorie began to surface. For years, the couple had been the epitome of success and love, constantly praised for their seemingly perfect relationship. Fans looked up to them as a symbol of what true love could look like, especially considering Steve's previous divorces. He often spoke about how Marjorie was the one who helped him find balance and purpose, calling her his queen, his best friend, the person who saved him. They were everything people hoped for in a relationship. Solid, united, and above the drama that often plagued other celebrity marriages. But behind the public facade, things were starting to unravel. There was no single event that caused the shift, no explosive argument or dramatic moment. It was more like a slow erosion. The couple, once inseparable, began to spend more time apart. Steve's demanding work schedule, his constant traveling, and his ever-growing brand kept him busy, while Marjorie started to appear more distant. They stopped showing the same affection in public, and photos of them together became less frequent. Rumors started to circulate, first quietly, then with growing intensity, about problems in their marriage. Some people whispered about trust issues, others about emotional distance. But the most hurtful rumor of all was the accusation of infidelity. Though there was no hard proof, the whispers of cheating grew louder. Photos were shared, social media posts were scrutinized, and gossip blogs thrived on the uncertainty surrounding their relationship. Steve didn't respond to the allegations directly, but the strain was clear. He started to remove posts about Marjorie, became more private on social media, and seemed to retreat further into his work. It was like he was trying to protect himself from the painful truth. But the more he pulled away, the more the public tried to fill in the gaps, speculating about the truth of the situation. Marjorie, for her part, remained mostly silent. She continued posting beautiful photos of herself, quoting scriptures and sharing updates about her fashion projects. But there was a noticeable change in her tone. What had once been bubbly and confident now seemed guarded. She wasn't speaking out, and her silence only fueled the rumors. Fans who had once adored the couple now found themselves questioning everything they had seen on social media and in the press. Were the pictures and posts just a facade? Had everything they thought they knew about Steve and Marjorie been a lie? The hardest part for Steve was that this wasn't just a private struggle, it was public. As someone who had built his career on giving advice about love, relationships, and perseverance, having his own marriage fall apart felt like the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't just personal for him, it was professional. He had always been a beacon of strength, wisdom, and success. Now he was left questioning himself, his decisions, and the woman he had trusted with his heart. The betrayal stung deeply. not only because it was happening in his personal life, but because it contradicted everything he had always taught others about love and commitment. The emotional toll of these rumors and public struggles became increasingly evident in Steve's behavior. His usual energy was gone. The man who once made millions laugh, who always had a witty comment and a big smile for the cameras, now seemed worn down, carrying the weight of his pain behind his eyes. His fans, who had long admired his resilience, began to see a side of Steve they had never seen before, a side that was vulnerable, hurt, and unsure of how to move forward. In interviews, he dropped subtle hints about betrayal and heartbreak. He didn't name Marjorie, but it was clear that his words were coming from a place of deep pain. One statement about forgiveness, "Sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest," caught the attention of his audience. And when he spoke about how difficult it was to forgive, but impossible to forget, people could sense the personal ache in his voice. His honesty was raw and unfiltered, a sharp contrast to the polished persona that fans were used to seeing. Despite the public spectacle, Steve tried to keep things together, but the cracks were becoming too wide to ignore. And then came the radio show moment. When a caller asked how to forgive someone who had betrayed them, Steve opened up like never before. His voice cracked with emotion as he spoke about the pain of loving someone deeply, only to have that love betrayed. It was a raw confession, a moment of vulnerability that shocked both his fans and those closest to him. He wasn't the man who always had the answers anymore. He was a man, broken and honest, grappling with the very emotions he had spent years advising others on. The public struggled to understand the depth of what Steve was going through. Fans who had once seen him as invincible now saw him as a man deeply hurt, trying to hold his world together while it was slowly falling apart. The situation was no longer just about a celebrity marriage in crisis. It was a real human story of heartbreak, betrayal, and the struggle to find peace in the aftermath. And for Steve, the hardest part was realizing that despite all his success, he couldn't fix everything, especially when the wound was caused by someone he once trusted with everything. It was a moment many never expected to see. Steve Harvey, the man known for his charismatic smile, infectious laugh, and endless wisdom, finally broke. In front of millions of listeners, Steve gave a raw, heartbreaking confession that left everyone speechless. He wasn't the wise, collected man we had all come to admire. In that moment, he was just a man, vulnerable, exposed, and struggling with the reality that his life, his marriage, was falling apart. It happened during a radio show taping. The topic of the day wasn't even about relationships. They were discussing trust, but as the conversation unfolded, Steve's emotions took over. A caller had asked how to forgive someone who had betrayed them, and without warning, Steve stopped. His voice faltered, and he went quiet for a moment, as if he had been holding something back for too long. He then let it out, no longer hiding behind his public persona. "I've been through something," he said, his voice barely holding steady. "Something that's broken me in ways I never expected." He didn't say her name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. His wife, Marjorie, the woman he once called his queen, the woman who had stood by his side through the ups and downs, through all the highs of his career and the darkest moments of his personal life. And now, here he was, admitting that everything had changed. When you love somebody with your whole heart and they betray that love, it's hard to breathe, he continued, pausing for a long moment, trying to catch his breath. There was no anger in his words, only pain. It wasn't the type of pain that comes from a single fight or a moment of betrayal. It was the kind of pain that builds up over time, the kind that slowly erodes a relationship until there's nothing left but the memory of what once was. For Steve, this wasn't just about a failed marriage. It was about the unraveling of everything he had worked for, everything he had built. His career, his family, his image, all of it had been intertwined with Marjorie, and now the very foundation he had relied on was crumbling. He went on to talk about forgiveness, not in the way he had advised so many others, but from a place of deep personal struggle. "You can forgive, but forgetting, that's different," he said. "Some things leave a scar, and I have a scar that's deep. I'm not gonna lie, it's hard. It's hard to breathe when you've given everything and you feel like it's not returned." His voice cracked as he admitted that he had tried everything to save the relationship. therapy, counseling, even stepping away from his work to focus on his marriage, all of it. But despite his efforts, it just wasn't enough. This wasn't the Steve Harvey we all knew. The man who had built an empire with his humor, his advice, and his public persona. The man who had always been strong, always able to make people laugh, always in control of his life. In that moment, he was just like anyone else, hurting, confused, and lost. His confession wasn't about seeking sympathy. It wasn't about pity or attention. It was about the weight of caring so much for so long and finally letting it go. "I've been walking around with this hole in my chest," Steve said, "pretending I'm okay when I'm not. And it's been hard. I've tried to keep it together for everyone, for my family, for my fans. But I can't anymore." It was clear that this moment had been a long time coming. Steve had spent months, maybe even years, trying to hold his life together while everything around him was falling apart. And now, in this public moment of vulnerability, he was letting it all out. What made this even more heartbreaking was the fact that Steve had always been the one to offer advice on love and relationships. He had built his career on helping others navigate their own struggles. He had always been the guy who knew what to say, who could offer wisdom in the face of adversity. And yet, here he was, admitting that even he didn't have all the answers. That, despite his success and all the advice he had given to others, he couldn't fix his own broken heart. For Steve, this confession wasn't just about his marriage, it was about his identity. The man who had spent decades building his brand as a relationship expert was now faced with the fact that his own life didn't match the image he had spent so long cultivating. The public loved him because of his confidence, his wisdom, and his humor. But behind the scenes, he was hurting just like anyone else. His story wasn't about perfection, it was about the messiness of life, the complexity of love, and the pain that comes with facing the truth. As he spoke, Steve also addressed the reality that no amount of success or fame can protect you from heartbreak. "Don't ever believe that fame or success can protect your heart," he said. "At the end of the day, we all bleed the same. We all hurt the same. And sometimes the smile you see on someone's face is just a mask hiding the storm inside." This was a man who had lived through the highs of Hollywood, who had everything many people dream of, and yet none of it could shield him from the most painful thing he had ever faced, the collapse of his marriage. In the days that followed his confession, Steve stayed quiet. He didn't post on social media. He didn't make any public statements. He simply took time for himself, processing the emotions that had come flooding to the surface. His fans, many of whom had been touched by his words of wisdom over the years, rallied behind him. There was an outpouring of love and support on social media. People who had followed him for years thanked him for being so honest, for showing them that even the strongest people can break, but they can also heal. Behind the scenes, Steve began preparing for the next step. The divorce process had officially begun, but Steve wasn't looking for a messy public spectacle. He wanted privacy. He wanted peace. Despite the betrayal, he didn't want to tear down the woman he once loved. He just wanted to move forward, quietly, with dignity. But, as expected, the tabloids continued to dig into the details of his personal life. They searched for answers, speculated about the reasons for the divorce, and kept the story in the headlines. Yet, Steve remained silent. For the first time in years, Steve Harvey was no longer the man with all the answers. He was the man who had lost love, who was broken, but who still believed in moving forward. Slowly, he began to rebuild. He focused on his work, not to escape, but because it gave him purpose. He started writing again, planning new projects, and pouring his energy into helping others in ways that were more personal than before. And in time, Steve found a new path. It wasn't about fame, success, or even love in the traditional sense. It was about healing, about finding peace with the pain, and about learning that life doesn't always go according to plan. But that doesn't mean it can't still be beautiful.